How the World We Made is Remaking Us, presented by Vybarr Reed today. So Vybarr is an author, academic and broadcaster who has written widely on the subjects of health, nature and the environment, including his most recent book, Primate Change. So How the World We Made is Remaking Us. So during today's webinar, Vybarr is going to give an overview of the kinds of changes that we can see in the human body that have been caused by our environment, from our height all the way down to our feet. So as always, there'll be a chance for a Q&A session after the presentation. So do submit these in the questions box in the bottom right-hand side of your screen at any time during the webinar. And these will be asked for you at the end. So no further ado, I'll hand over to Vybarr. So thank you for logging in, and Vybarr, it's over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me on. Yeah, as Rihanna said, I'm going to be talking to you about mostly about my book, Primate Change, but more broadly about how about the Anthropocene body, really, about how the human-made environment is having such an impact on our bodies. In terms of my own research, the book that I did before this was a running book, and in that I wrote a fair bit about biomechanics, about the human body, how it works, what it wants to do, what it needs to do, and how we use it. And just as I was finishing that, I had an idea for another project, which I thought was just going to be a little radio series, which is thinking about instead of looking at the environment and seeing what humans have made to the what changes humans have made to the environment, which are of course hugely significant, looking to see if the environment had in fact changed the human body. And what I thought I'd find, what I was expecting to find, was that there'd be like one or two aspects of the human being that had been altered just by, not exercising very much, something like that. But what I found when I actually came to write the book and researched it, I was absolutely astonished by the range, the sheer number of changes that we can see, that every one of us can see, in fact, when we look in the mirror. So the you that you see when you look in the mirror may not be the you that your DNA intended. So when we look at our faces are, they're inherent to our identity. They're completely unique. So much so that we use them as a security measure to unlock our precious devices. Our faces are really, really unique to us. But actually, to make a human, you don't just need genetic code. What you need two things. You need the genetic code and a place for that code to operate in. And if you change one, then you change the other. So having really fantastic DNA, like having the shark's teeth DNA, or that means that you're that you can regrow your teeth if they fall out, or having gills that are really, really adept at getting oxygen out of water. These sort of depend on the fact that you're going to be born and live in water. And if your environment changes, you need to have good DNA for that environment. So you need both things. So over the years, and I'm talking many, many years, what's happened is the environment that the human body, the human DNA, I mean, even to call it human DNA is problematic in itself, but the environment that human DNA is optimized for is basically a savanna, a grassland in Africa. So it's not that so much that the environment is changing our DNA; it's changing the way in which our DNA operates. And the book really was about looking at everything from the tips of our toes to the tops of our heads, to the shape of our faces, to what's happening in our mouths, to what's happening in our jaws, to what's happening to the shape of our skulls. The book was really about all of these changes that all of us can see on every one of our modern bodies. So one of the central questions that stands that runs throughout the book is why are we so ill? So in the UK and the US, what we have is we have vast numbers of people on prescription medication. So bearing in mind humans are at the top of the food chain, bearing in mind that we worked our way to the top of the food chain over 2 million years. Yet 70% of people in the US are on prescription medication. It's enough pills to go around the world twice, and I think actually to do another Atlantic crossing. But even in the UK, we don't fare that much better in the UK. We're still quite an ill nation. 50% of us are on prescription medication. So if the human body is so great, why do half of us need to take pills? I have to take medication every single day. I don't have severe allergies, but I have moderate to severe asthma. So that means I've been taking medication daily since about the age of 15, I suppose. So for decades, for well over 3 decades. So what is happening in the human body that is making us so ill? And if we take a very, very long view, we can see that in the last few thousand years, we've changed quite substantially, really very quickly. As to when exactly was that humans, as a genus, as a family, begin, it's debatable. But if we take the figure to be roughly about 2 million years, with starting with Homo habilis, then it's only in the last few thousand years that we've started farming. Agriculture began probably about 10,000 years ago. It's probably longer than that, in fact, but the agreed figure is about 10,000 years ago. And then we had the Industrial Revolution a few hundred years ago. And I think the human brain isn't really adapted to understand how small an amount of time that actually is. If you think about the 9 to 5 of a working day, and if humans get up on 2 feet at 9 a.m., the agricultural revolution, I think, starts at about 4:58 p.m. And the industrial revolution happens within the last 2 seconds before 5 p.m. So in the time that it would take you to sneeze during a working day, everything that you see around you, unless some of you are listening to this or watching this podcast, in a country park somewhere, but actually even then, to be honest, everything that you can see around you is as a result of that sort of 1.5 seconds of time, the Industrial Revolution. So on the whole, it feels like generationally, it feels like we're changing the world at a pace that we are, I suppose, comfortable with, but it's one that we're familiar with. It's a pace of change that we're familiar with. And then when we look back at what our parents did, we see their habits, we see the food that they ate, we see their bodies, we see their faces, and we seem like we're a little bit different to them, but maybe not so much. And this is one of the problems with thinking about the human body and also about human time, is that we tend to think in fractions of our own lifetime. So in terms of generations, when in fact, there's this huge swathe of unimaginable time. To say 2 million years or 2.3 million years, what does that even mean? It doesn't, a million doesn't really make any sense to anybody who's not a mathematical genius, I think. So the human body, our habits, the human body and the habits that make our bodies have come about fairly recently. But when we think of habits over the last few hundred years, that doesn't seem new. It's only when you take in the much longer view that we can start to see some of these changes and to see why it is that the Anthropocene human is a work of art 10,000 years in the making. So much of the changes I'm going to be talking about are going to be ones that have taken place within either the last 10,000 or in the last few hundred years, but sometimes it's going to be in the case of the last 50 years. I'm principally interested in the 19th century, and lots of the book, in fact, looks at some of the changes that took place in the 19th century and how we are either repeating or accelerating those changes in modern life. But many of the worries about what the environment is doing to our bodies really begins in the 19th century. There are a few more statistics coming a bit later in the talk that focus specifically on the 19th century. But sedentism, or not getting sufficient exercise or physical activity, did become a particular problem, particularly for the moneyed classes in the 19th century. And this is a frontispiece, fantastic frontispiece from a wonderful book by Edward W. Duffin from 1848, and he wrote a study of spine pathologies. It's exquisitely illustrated. There are some wonderful illustrations about how habit, the studying habits of young children can change the way that their spine works. So we're going to be talking about what's happened over a very, very long period of time, and also in the last few hundred years, but also within the last couple of generations. But going back to some of those longer periods. So today, we have problems like osteoarthritis. I think something like 8.4, I think the figure is 8.47 million people in this country have sought medical help for osteoarthritis, and some 3 million people have osteoporosis, a condition of brittleness in the bones. And once you learn these figures and you think, gosh, this is really something of concern. It's something that you should try to avoid if at all you can. But the prevalence of these numbers is not so surprising. A study was published by a team at Harvard. What year are we? 2019. So it's 2 years ago. I think it's 2017. That looked at rates of osteoarthritis. And what they did was they looked at the bone density and the rates of osteoarthritis in pre-agricultural peoples, agricultural peoples, 19th century humans, and then in modern humans. Osteoarthritis, it's where the cartilage, which is like really kind of super shiny, super hard rubber on the end of the bone that allows your joints to move. It's where that wears away. And what happens is, once the cartilage wears away, you get a very distinctive pattern on the end of the bone called eburnation. And that leaves sort of scars and scratch marks on the bones. So it's quite easy to find, fairly severe cases of osteoarthritis in fossilized bones. And what they found was that in the samples that they could get that were, 10,000 years or older, that rates of osteoarthritis in pre-agricultural peoples was about 8%. About 8%. Sorry, this was in people over the age of 50. They obviously had to estimate the ages of the fossilized remains. So it was about 8%. In the 19th century bones, they found rates of osteoarthritis at about 6%. So between pre-agricultural and early agricultural peoples, there was a slight drop in osteoarthritis to 6% in the 19th century, suggesting that, I don't know, people were probably on their feet more, doing factory work, or were more reliant on walking and rather than on modes of transport. But the really significant thing that they found was, so the drop between 8% and 6% isn't so significant. The sample sizes are also quite small because there aren't that many fossilized remains that can be used for a sample. But what was really significant was, so that's an 8 to 6% drop. And then they used some post-Second World War samples as well. And at that point, there was a jump from 6% to 16%. So the number had nearly tripled. So it looks like cases of osteoarthritis have nearly tripled since the war. And once you start thinking again in this very, very long view, you can start to see connections between how we use our bodies and how the DNA of our bodies expects our bodies to be used. So if you look, it's not as simple as this, but if you look at pre-agricultural people, early agriculturalists and modern workers, you'll find that there's significant changes in bone density. So there've been studies done on arms and elbows that looked at the changes in bone density between pre-agricultural humans, up to 1.6 million years ago, and looked at the bone density drop between that and Neolithic farmers, and they found that there was a drop in bone density of about 30%. So when humans stopped moving, when some clever blighter first thought, I know what I'm going to do with that seed, I'm going to stick it in the soil and I'm going to wait for a year and see what happens. So when sedentism, when agriculture first arrives, what we see in the human body is it's reflected in the human body. There's a great drop in bone density from living out on the plains or the savannah to the sedentism of agriculture. Our bodies respond by cutting back the bone density because it's just not necessary for our bones to be as thick and strong. The human body is really, really good at not wasting calorific, the metabolic effort to maintain a human body. If a bone doesn't need to be thick, then it's going to strip back some of the density because otherwise it's wasting calories. You need to keep more food to carry the heavy bones and heavy muscles. So there's Wolff's law and there's Davis's law. One is for the bones of the body, saying that they'll remap to loading and they'll either get thicker or thinner. And then there's Davis's law, which is the same for muscles and tendons. So what you have is a 30% drop between hunter-gatherers and agriculturalist farmers. And then there was a fantastic study done in 2017 that looked at humeral rigidity, that looked at the upper arm bones of agriculturalist women from northern Eurasia, what would now be Germany. And what they found was absolutely staggering. So they found they compared the arm bones of women from about 5,000 years ago, from about 5,000 years BCE, to those of modern workers, and they also found that between the agriculturalists and the modern workers there was a drop of 30%. So you get a drop of about 30% going from hunter-gathering to agricultural life, and then you get another drop from agricultural life to modern workers of about another 30%. So what that means is that modern humans have less than half of the bone density of hunter-gatherers. Less than half of the bone density of hunter-gatherers. The group that were looking at agriculturalists to modern humans also found that the humeral rigidity, the arm strength of the bone and the size of the muscle attachments on the arm, they were able to conclude that these agriculturalist women were stronger than Olympic rowing teams. So this is what I'm talking about when I mean that our idea of what's normal for the human body, what a normal kind of level of strength is, or a normal kind of movement, is really, really warped by our intergenerational memory, by our much shorter generational memory. So we think we should probably walk a little bit more than we do, when in fact we have less than half of the fitness and strength of hunter-gatherers. So the Anthropocene body is unimaginably weaker. Bearing in mind the difference between the agriculturalist and the modern human is that of normal worker to Olympian. the differences are absolutely huge, and it's one very clear way in which we can see that the Anthropocene body is responding to the ease and the frictionlessness of our environment. So going back to what I was saying at the beginning of the talk, where I was talking about the face that you see in the mirror may not be the you that nature intended. One of the ways in which our faces have changed is the shape of our jaw. So I made a series actually for the BBC World Service that was called "Changing World, Changing Bodies." In one of the programs, we went to Singapore to look at to find out more about what it is that's changing about the shape of our faces. So as we moved from a subsistence diet on the plains to a more carbohydrate diet, a starchier diet that we farmed, what happened is that the bone density in our jaw changed really quite drastically. So what you'd find in the fossil record, what you'd find is that the skulls of hunter-gathering groups have these wonderful jaws in which the teeth are nearly always perfectly aligned. There's no crookedness, there's no underbite, there's no overbite. The teeth, in fact, sit right on top of one another. And there's a perfect sort of dental cascade. One of the pictures that we took of one of the experts at the University of Buffalo in New York had her standing in a sort of large cabinet surrounded by 3D printouts of all of these fossilized remains and all these grinning skeletons with really fantastic teeth. But what you find is that as soon as we start farming, one of the ways in which our faces changed is that our jaws just become much, much smaller. I'm guessing, like almost everybody that's listening to this, if they work their tongue around their teeth, they're going to find that there are, unless they've been straightened already, they're going to find that they're maybe a little bit crooked. I'd say most people that are listening to this might have had a problem with a wisdom tooth or had their wisdom teeth removed. What happens is that our genes, the genes for jaw growth and the genes for teeth growth, they don't really talk to one another. They're operating on two separate systems entirely, so that when our adult teeth come through, the plan that our DNA has for what's going to happen with our teeth, it executes regardless of what the environment is like. And because the diet that we've eaten is softer and mealier, because a lot of the processing of the food, instead of being done in the mouth like it is for Mesolithic hunters, instead of the processing being done in the mouth, the constant chewing of raw meat or of really gritty foodstuffs like tubers, instead the processing is done outside of the mouth. More cooking is done, and grains are just softer. So during our adolescence, the jaw doesn't have the right kind of stimulation, so it doesn't grow as big. And then when the adult teeth come through, there's no space for them, and we end up with sort of crooked teeth or problems where molars become twisted, or if you're like me, not even all your wisdom teeth don't even bother coming through because they just think, oh, forget it, there's no room. So as you look in the mirror, the jaw that you would have, there's no one clear single story with this, but the jaw that you would have would probably protrude more than it does. It would the mandible would protrude further out in front of your face. Not a huge amount, but certainly enough for all of the teeth that your body wanted to grow to fit into them. One of the other ways in which our faces have changed is because so many of us now have to wear spectacles. Excuse me. And again, we think of things like short-sightedness as being a genetic problem. We observe that it runs in families. If parents are short-sighted, then it's likely that their children will as well. But there's a story about short-sightedness which which really does reveal how our bodies are responding to the environment. So for the Faces programme for the BBC, we went to Singapore, and there we learned that that people were having, plastic surgeons now work on the masseter muscles of the face, because people's jaws are bulging out sideways because they're stressed and they're grinding their teeth. So not only are people's jaws shorter, but they're also going wider. Our food has changed the shape of our jaws. It's actually even changed the shape of our skull. Noreen von Kramen-Taubadel at the University of Buffalo has done a study on the skull shape and how it's changed between modern humans and agriculturalist humans. But we're also in Singapore because about 85% of the young people in Singapore are short-sighted. And although there is a genetic aspect to myopia, to short-sightedness, it looks like anything in the region of 200 to 400 genes are at play in short-sightedness. But it looks like the genes that predict this condition are in fact very weak. They only contribute about 20% to the outcome of the condition. And as they're discovering, not just in Singapore but all over the world, that children that have certain experiences in early life are much more likely to become short-sighted. Singapore is an interesting place. 85% of the young people have got short-sightedness there. But the best statistic is in fact young men in the South Korean capital of Seoul. 96.7% of young men in Seoul are short-sighted. And if you compare this to short-sightedness in hunter-gathering communities, the data isn't very good. But there was data taken in what's now Gabon, really quite early, like in the 1930s. And it looked like short-sightedness had a prevalence of about 0.4%. So in 100 people, you'd find less than one eye that was short-sighted. So commonly, short-sightedness is to do with, it's commonly believed that it's to do with close work, and it looks like some of this may be true, that close work is involved in driving the outcome of short-sightedness. But what it looks like is that it's really access to good quality light. So the eye, when we're born long-sighted. So the eyeball is ever so slightly longitudinally oblate. It's sort of oval shaped, where it's tall from top to bottom, not from side to side. And then what happens is, as we grow, the eyeball also grows with us, and it grows to become pretty much spherical. And then as the eyeball is developing, what it's doing is it's waiting for the right kind of environmental cues so that it knows to stop growing, that it's reached its point of optimum focus where it can see things that are both near and far. But it looks like that close work tends to be associated with indoor activities, so reading, gaming, TV watching, and it looks like it's access to good quality light that actually might be driving the myopia epidemic. And it is an epidemic. It's at the moment it's predicted that if nothing's done to curb the trend of myopia, then by 2050, half the world's population will be short-sighted. So what happens is, without access to good quality light, if children spend too much time indoors, then it means that the eye, it continues growing because it's waiting for confirmation that its optimum shape has been released, and has been reached, and it can't do that without access to good quality light, good quality data, as it were. So it keeps growing, and it keeps growing, it keeps growing, and it ends up being oblate from side to side. And what happens is you end up short-sighted. Now, it's not just a case of then you just pop down to the opticians and everything's fine. Because in cases of high, well, actually, in lots of lower and middle income nations, families can't afford to do that anyway. But also, in cases of high myopia, which is extreme myopia, the likelihood of developing, eyesight problems in older age is much, much higher, and can actually lead to blindness as well. So even if you have surgery on your eyes, because it's only the lens that's being operated on, the damage to the retina that's done when the eyeball grows out of shape, it still remains. So our faces are different. We have to wear glasses. Our jaws are a different shape. Our faces are flatter than they should be. Our teeth don't fit in our head. People are worried about everything, which causes stress. Stress grinds teeth, which means that the masseter muscles in the side of our face get bigger as well. So lots of stuff is going on in the face. But the biggest problem that's facing modern humans, it's a problem that is that we're seeing really all across the world, is that of low back pain. So I told you earlier that I was a sufferer of asthma. Well, I'm also a sufferer of low back pain. So I met a spine biomechanics specialist at the anatomy school in Bristol, and spoke to him about what happens to our spines as we get older. And he told me that the loading of our discs changes a great deal over time. And he also told me some amazing facts as well, like the fact that the metabolic turnover of our discs, so disc repair, the metabolic turnover of our discs, the reason they're so difficult, if something goes wrong, it's so difficult for them to get better, is that the metabolic turnover of a disc is 200 years. So our discs need to be they just need to be full of what's it called, protoglycogen. No, I can't remember. They need to be full and spongy and bouncy and rubbery, and we need to look after them. But like most parts of our body, what they seem to not like doing is doing nothing. So one of the programs that we also made for the BBC was about back pain, and to make that program, we went to rural and urban Kenya. We went to urban Kenya because, Nairobi is just like any other modern city now. It has lots of people doing sedentary work. But we also went to an extremely remote village called Pemja, which was about 200 miles. Yeah, it was about 200 miles from Nairobi. The village isn't accessible to cars. It's a kind of lifestyle. I mean, not completely, because they had things like t-shirts that had minions on them and things like that. But on the whole, it's a lifestyle that someone from 5,000 to 10,000 years ago would recognize. It's one that has some tools that are obviously from the Industrial Revolution, but people mostly live, they grow food and they take the food to the market and they sell the food, and then they use that money to buy other kinds of food, etc. So it's a subsistence life. And we met a scientist, a biomechanist, who'd been working on this, on the population of this village. I guess the population of the village was about 150 to 200, maybe 100 to 150 actually. And the reason that the scientist, Robert Ojambo, his name was, had found this population was because he wants to find a population that had never ever worn shoes. And what he also found was that that back pain in the village, I mean, it practically didn't exist. People occasionally got it from doing a particularly hard day working in their garden. or working on their crops, but it was usually to do with tiredness, and we certainly didn't meet anybody there that had chronic back pain. So back pain is now the #1 cause of global disability. It used to be the case that higher income nations reported extremely high levels of back pain, whereas lower income nations seemed immune from it. But actually, that's just started to change in about the last 10 years. So it used to be that countries like, Portugal is one, but Mexico, India, a number of African countries that were able to submit data, they just didn't, back pain just wasn't a significant issue for them. Whereas in about the last sort of 5 to 10 years, that started to change, and these lower to middle income nations are starting to catch up with the global trend. It's a terrible, terrible problem. At any given moment, so as in right now, there are 540 million people on the planet that are suffering from back pain. It's an astonishing number. I mean, it's the population of America, of the USA, as well as a good part of South America as well, all suffering back pain at any given time. So as one person's is cured or relieved, someone else's goes. So it looks like, as our, if you think about the bone diagram a few slides back, as our bodies are getting weaker, it looks like they become less shielded to certain pathologies. So it's not that arthritis didn't exist 10,000 years ago, it's just there was less of it. And back pain, we don't know how much back pain people experienced 10,000 years ago or 20,000 years ago. But if the people of Pembrokeshire are anything to go by, it does look like back pain was just much, much more rare than it is today. It's in the UK, I think it's the second most likely cause of missed days of work. The first is probably the Wimbledon final. I don't know. But this is also now beginning to happen throughout the world. So it looks like our backs, our vertebrae, the very thing that makes us, is beginning to give up on us. So the reason for this is there's lots and lots of reasons. I mean, one of the main ones is of course the chair, the fact that we sit down and that we work as much as we do. If you look back through literary history, you're not going to find back pain really being mentioned. I mean, there's Shakespeare's Richard III, but up until the 19th century, it just doesn't really feature in literature, and then it does start to appear much more frequently. But chairs should be one of the most potent symbols of the Anthropocene. If you go back through history, if you look back through our literature, bearing in mind literature begins practically at the same moment that city life begins, with the Epic of Gilgamesh about 4,000 years ago, then it's just not that easy to find chairs. If you go through time, the number of chairs in the Iliad is 0. The number of chairs in the Odyssey is 0 as well. There are some benches mentioned for Penelope's suitors, but these are not like chairs with a back. Chairs in the Bible is 0. Chairs in Hamlet is also 0. Chairs in King Lear. There's a really great stage direction in, I think it's the first folio of King Lear, when it says, "Enter King Lear, carried in a chair, everyone kneels." And this is really quite significant, because for thousands of years, chairs have been around for thousands of years, but for thousands of years, chairs were symbols of power. The highest attainment in my own profession, academia, is called a chair. If you get a professorship, then it's a chair. The person that runs a company is the chairperson. The person that runs a meeting is the chair. In 19th century fiction, we know from reading the novels of Disraeli that once somebody was elected, there was then a celebration that was called chairing, where the new member of parliament would pay would pay a lot of locals to carry, I was going to say him or her, but actually that's rubbish. It would be him, to carry him around in a chair as faux supporters. So King Lear has got 3, which makes sense, being, given that the subject matter is about kings, queens, and princesses and power. But then once you swing by about 1852, Dickens's Bleak House has 187 chairs in it. So something about the Industrial Revolution meant that chairs proliferated, incredibly. I did a thing in my book when I suddenly stopped and looked around me and thought, how many chairs do we have? And once I'd counted up how many there were, I was astonished. I own 22 chairs. I live in a flat and there are only 2 of us. I'm sure if you look around you now, whatever room you're in, whether you're in an office or whether you're at home, and have a think about all the chairs that you have, and that's not just something you can sit on, it has to be something that you sit on with a back to it. There must be 60 billion chairs on the planet. If once you think about all the universities, all of the schools, and all of the the stadia throughout the world, they must outnumber us at least by 10 to 1. It's a symbol of Anthropocene life. So if people didn't really sit in chairs, what did they do? Well, the reason that people started sitting in chairs a lot in the 19th century is not only political reasons, that that power structures fundamentally changed with the Industrial Revolution and also with the French Revolution. But it's also that modes of work began to change as well. It's not, chairs didn't just suddenly appear in the 19th century. You can find them, as part of the wills of belongings for people in the 17th century. But again, benches and stools are much more common than chairs are in those documents. So it's not that chairs just suddenly appear, but also the ability to make a chair became a lot easier. In 1859, the year of, it's quite prescient really, the year of Darwin's On the Origin of Species. In that same year, the bistro chair was invented. The wooden curved chair that you see in their thousands in cafes in Paris, that has a woven seat. This was the first mass production chair. And if you think about what's happened to chairs in the 19th and 20th century, chairs used to be thrones. They used to be symbols of extreme, of great power. But in fact, now they're something that you can pick up on an auction site for a penny. Or if you go on Free Cycle, you can find them for even less than that. So chairs have dropped in price, and we now do the kinds of work that mean that we have to sit in them a lot more. And also modes of leisure have changed as well. So when we stream our Netflix or our Amazon Primes, we do it usually while sitting in a chair. So we all know that chairs are bad for us. Actually, what's really bad for us is just being still. So whether you're standing at a desk or sitting at a desk, standing is moderately better. But actually being still is just not what the human body wants or needs to do. One of the reasons it's bad for us, and one of the reasons it's bad for back pain, is that we know, like the little that we do know about causes of back pain, is that being still is a good predictor of back pain. Just like reading 2 or more books as a child each week is a good predictor of short-sightedness. Sorry, I've just seen that comment. A comment just came up saying, "Oh my God, I have 20 chairs in my house. Why 20 chairs?" So it's not that the kind of work that we do has just fundamentally changed, and it means that when we sit down, what happens is our feet are unloaded, our knees are unloaded, a lot of weight goes through our lower spine, where the pelvis meets the spine, the sacrum of the back. But actually, as soon as you lean back, like that, all of the muscles in your back and in your chest, so that the muscles that support your torso, the epaxial and hypaxial muscles, they're disengaged. And it's a lovely thing to do. It's great not using muscles, isn't it? But what happens is over the years, what we're doing as we unload these muscles, as we unload these tendons, going back to that simple bone diagram, what's happening is that we are making ourselves slightly weaker. You know, as the months, I was going to say that as the weeks, but really as the months and the years go by, what happens is that we're persuading our bodies that this is the body we need. We don't need upper body muscles to hold us upright because we have these things that we can lean on the whole time. And this isn't such a problem in the early 19th century when, you know, sedentary workers were about 0.2% of the workforce. But then as the century progresses, you get more people doing office work. So if you think of like Bob Cratchit in A Christmas Carol, or Kermit the Frog in A Muppet Christmas Carol, you know, the jobs that they did, they were sedentary jobs. But even when they did those sedentary jobs, as rare as they were, they had to carry heavy ledgers. They walked to work. They walked back. There was still activity that they did. And if you fast forward to today, we've gone from 0.2% to about 85% of the workforce being sedentary. And, you know, who's carrying around heavy ledgers? Nobody is. I've got a terabyte of storage on my iPad. Why would I need to carry around a ledger anywhere? So even the moderate physical work that office workers once did, even that has been taken away from us. So instead of sitting, what we used to do was we used to squat, and squatting is a very old mode of rest. The knees are loaded, the feet are loaded. It's a much better way to recline. But after you've listened to this talk, just try and do what's in that picture there. Unless you've been practicing, and I do mean practicing a lot, there is no way that your modern body will let you move in that way. Okay, so chairs are everywhere. Chairs reduce bone density on our backs, pelvis, hips, knees, ankles, and even in our feet. One of the other programs we made for the BBC was a program about our feet, and about why it is that they've grown by 2 sizes in the last 4 decades. And I'm going to skip the next slide. And then think about the sorts of things that we try and do to alleviate these problems are that we all know that we are supposed to exercise. But exercise is a really strange thing. You know, again, if we think about the long form, if you think about the long form of what's been happening in the human body, exercise only really starts once you have other people to do your work for you. So it's not really until you get city states that exercise becomes necessary. And the reason that you need exercise is because you have slaves. Now things have changed. There is still an aspect of this privilege and social inequality to exercise, insofar as any of the clothes that I'm wearing at the moment, I am wearing clothes. Any of the clothes that I'm wearing at the moment, I couldn't tell you where any of them were made. But it's also because that our work patterns have changed, and also because of technology as well. So there's a confluence of issues that mean that we have to exercise the human body. And exercise is good, exercise is excellent, but really what we need in modern life, what we need for longevity is physical activity. We need sustained physical activity. And this is what I mean about our sense of what's normal for the human body being completely warped. So we now think if you exercise for 30 minutes 5 times a week, that sounds like a super fit person. But actually, we don't really know how much pre-agricultural people moved. They probably moved about 5 to 9 miles every day. But a recent study suggested that 41% of adults aged between 40 and 60 walk briskly for less than 10 minutes a month. But we spend a great deal of our time, our fingers are doing all the work. They can roam, a mile to 2 miles a day. 2 miles a day would be really heavy keyboard use. But if you think about all the swiping that you do on your phone, if we could just commit to moving that much in real life, it would mean that, we could probably halve the healthcare bill globally. Okay, I'm going to wind it up there. If you go through the rest of the slides that we have, you'll see that I was going to talk to you some more about sedentary work and how it's changing our bodies and the sorts of things that we can do about it. In the book, at the end of each section, that tells us about the history of the modern body. What there also is at the end of those sections is a winding back section, which talks about some of the simple things that you can do. It's not about drinking, water from streams or eating raw meat or anything like that, but it's just about cherry picking aspects of human behaviour from distant generations that are very, very good for us today. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Vybarr. That was really interesting. Some really interesting points that you really flag that you don't really notice that you do until you kind of bring them to attention.
Yeah.
Really interesting. And could have listened to you go on about the sedentary working and all sorts of things moving forward. But I know this is probably a question that everybody likes to ask you, but when you talk about the statistics of the short-sightedness over in Southeast Asia, how and kind of various impacts that they've had over here, how can we kind of address some of our habitual changes? Have you ever had quite leading conversations with people where you've thought about how we could maybe prevent that coming up or getting worse in the future?
So there's no hard data for short-sightedness amongst the younger generation in Europe, but it suggests that it's about 40 to 50% at the moment. So it's already very high. But really, the way to tackle this is quite straightforward, which is that children need to have access to more good quality light, and that really means going outside. Now, going outside can it's not that easy for modern parents to just send their children out into the garden. I mean, if I had children, our garden is so unbelievably tiny. I don't think it would be any benefit to them at all. But when I was in Singapore, they are starting to experiment with just changing, because lots of these problems are about how we are educated. The reason that we can't squat anymore is because we spent the first 18 years of our life being taught to sit still on a chair. So of course our bodies have become adept at doing that, but they're not so good at doing a squat. So lots of this comes out of the ways in which we're educated. So in Singapore, what some schools are doing now, they do have. Singapore is different to the UK. They don't really have houses. They tend to live in apartments, which means that they have limited access to outdoor space. But what the schools are doing is they're introducing more playtimes during the day. No gadgets are allowed during playtimes. And during the playtimes, they'll have both structured and unstructured play. They're changing timetables so that one class will be in one corner of the school and the next class will be at the other corner of the school, which means that the kids are getting, light activity by walking from one side of the school to the other. But it also means they're getting access to good quality light. In China, they also experimented with glass classrooms, which yeah, so that didn't work. But they are what they're not doing is pulling down the blinds now, so that the kids can see the projector on the board. They're constantly aware of how much light is in the classroom when they're teaching as well. So there are lots of things that we can do, but it's really about access to light. I also think gadgets are getting better. So gadget use is a problem, but gadget use isn't going away. And as gadgets are getting brighter, I think the most recent iPhone does about 700 nits. Once you get to about 800, 850, you can clearly see that screen is really bright in bright sunlight. And I think as these gadgets become a bit more mobile, I think this might help it as well. I don't think gadgets are going away, but it would be great if they weren't such an inherent part of the problem.
Yeah, definitely. And glass classrooms sound like a recipe for disaster, but a really interesting approach. So yeah, I guess the kind of structure of our education system in a little way can play a massive part in this. Like you say, changes of break times and frequency of break times and quality of outside time.
Yeah.
One of our listeners has actually just briefly said, thank you for the talk, but could you speak a tiny bit more about Hayfever analogies?
Yeah,
a couple of minutes.
Can I speak about Hayfever analogies? Yeah,
something succinct that you could say.
Okay, so actually, if you're really interested in this, I wrote an article for The Observer. So if you search for my name and The Observer and allergies, the article will come up. And that was mainly about nut allergy.
Got you.
But allergies they're a complicated problem. But I think, again, what we do is we look at our parents' generation and think, well, my mum has a little bit of asthma, so I'm no different to her. But actually, once you start taking just a slightly longer view, you'll find that there is allergies do not have a deep history in the human body. I mean, it was definitely the case that people, that hunter-gatherers, there would have been hunter-gatherers that had an allergy, but it was so rare. The idea of an allergy was so rare that the term itself was only invented in the 20th century. Hayfever is really interesting. Hayfever is used in some industrial novels in the 1840s. In fact, I think Benjamin Disraeli was one of the first people to use the term in the 1830s. It used to be called hay asthma, and it also used to be, asthma is Greek for panting. It used to be called hay asthma, and it also used to be called a summer cold as well. But hay fever, when it first started, was the way that Disraeli uses it in his fiction. God, the name of the novel slips my mind for the moment. But he has William IV using it as an excuse to not attend events. So what hay fever began as was this really aspirational disease. It was a disease that only really, really, really privileged and rich people had. And this sort of changes slightly throughout the 19th century. In 1910, in E.M. Forster's Howard's End, there's an industrial family that they go to this beautiful house, Howard's End, that's been inherited from the matriarchal side, and on the first page, one of them has gone out into the fantastic garden, and the reason that she's gone out into the garden is to do some exercises, some aerobic exercises, calisthenics as they then were. But all of the family, or the house rejects them all because they all have hay fever. So hay fever began as sort of being something that meant you'd been well educated or that you were from a very rich background. It was a sort of aspirational disease, and the reason for this, in fact, is because people that are brought up, a long way from nature, that don't have animals in the house, are statistically just much, much more likely to develop allergies, especially asthma and hay fever. And what it is that we have a gland sort of near our heart, and for most of us, it's about the size of our, the tip of our of one of our fingers, and it's called the thymus. And what it does in babies, it's huge. Like in babies, it's probably about the same size as the heart. It's a big organ, because in babies it has an enormous amount of work to do, because what's happening is it's having to acquaint the human body of the baby with its immediate environment. So the babies are born with brains that are ready to take up information, and their bodies are born with a thymus that's very active, ready to take up information as it learns about its environment. And it looks like, this is very, very simplified, but it looks like what happens is that there are, just like with eyesight, there are developmental windows that close. And if your immune system is not correctly educated in early life by exposure to the right kinds of microbiota, to the right kinds of proteins that you'll brush up against a lot in modern life, it looks like the immune system then goes on to fight battles that it doesn't need to fight against otherwise harmless things like dust mite shit, peanuts, and pollen. So it looks like it's something that allergies are something that happen because we just grow up really far away from nature.
Interesting, really interesting. And when you put that analysis on it, it's a topic in itself.
Yes.
We are really running out of time, so I need to wrap up. But I just have one question from one of our attendees, David, and he just asked, have you had much interest from decision makers and government within the UK about implementing some changes in our society to prevent these?
No, I haven't, and I would really like to. I think many of the exercise campaigns that we have, like recommendations by the NHS and public health recommendations like the Active 10, I think they're just sending the wrong message. They're really sending the wrong message, and I'd love to get involved with talks with decision makers to think about how we can persuade people, how we can help people to introduce a bit more friction into their lives, because the problem is that we have too little, and it's killing us.
Interesting. Well, you never know. Somebody hopefully might listen to this or read your book and take that forward, or contact you. You never know. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for everybody who logged in.
Thank you
very much, Vybarr, for your time. That was really interesting.
Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, thank you.
Continue that. Just a quick note to those attendees who did log in, make sure you log this as CPD on the IES CPD tool just by logging in through the members area. You can do that online. If you've got any problems, let us know. We can help you. So this webinar has been recorded and it will be put on our YouTube channel for you to watch at a later date or share with your teams. And the next one will be up on the website very shortly. So do keep an eye out for that. Members, you will also be emailed about it. So thank you all for listening. And finally, thank you very much, Vybarr, for your time.
Thanks very much indeed.